another story that's been starting to brew. Very interesting. Another story involving a prominent coordinator at the NFL level, and that's Eric Bieniemy. Now, obviously, we know that the USC football program just fired Clay Helton. And I'm a UCLA guy, so quite frankly, I would have been happy if Clay Helton stayed in there, even though he's a very nice guy. He was just a mediocre coach. He did win a Rose Bowl in 2016. But the thing is, after that loss to Stanford, Mike Bohn, the athletic director, finally came to his senses and realized, okay, we can no longer retain this type of coach. USC is a historic program that has decorated athletes across from top to bottom. And all of a sudden, we've got this offensive coordinator, one of the best offensive coordinators in the game, Eric Bieniemy, Andy Reid's protege, this offensive genius who's emerging as a candidate. Now, just for some context, because most people won't know, Eric Bieniemy actually is really kind of from Southern California. Played his high school ball at Bishop Amat, which is in La Puente, California. He played as a running back at Colorado. He's a star running back at Colorado, so he's familiar with the Pac-12, with its ties, what it represents, the culture that it tries to foster, that it tries to cultivate. And when we think about USC and when they were at the height of their dominance, and they're multiple decades, it spans, to their credit, it spans multiple decades. They've won 9 national championships. But when USC has been the most relevant and been the most successful is when they've had coaches that have either had NFL experience or continue to go on to have NFL experience. John Robinson, great coach, started his career with SC, then became the head coach of the LA Rams, then came back to USC, 1976 to 1984, won a national championship in 1778. They didn't have football back then. 1978 wins a national championship. And so you think about guys like that. You think about Pete Carroll, how he started his career with the Jets and the Patriots and then became the head coach at USC, won back-to-back titles in 2003, 2004. Then obviously left to go on to be the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. Those are obviously the days of Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush and Lundell White and some tremendous players, Troy Polamalu, some tremendous athletes and studs on that team. The only kind of exceptions you have at USC, John McKay, who, again, most people probably don't know, 1960 to 1975, won 4 national titles at USC. And though he started his career at the college level, he ended up being the head football coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, again, you've got those ties from the college to the NFL level. And the final guy, and unfortunately I can't claim to have been alive, no one did, Howard Jones, was the head football coach 1925 to 1940. And the only reason why he didn't have any NFL experience is because the NFL's inception was in 1920, so it really wasn't that successful up to that point. So the reason why this makes sense to me, having a guy like Eric Bieniemy be the head coach, again, if this report is true and if this is a mutual interest from both parties, the biggest reason why, to me, this would be a huge coup for USC is because what are Eric Bieniemy's greatest strengths? This guy is an offensive genius, as I had mentioned, Andy Reid's protege, but he's great not only with running backs, but he's great at developing quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes has absolutely raved about him since he's been with the Kansas City Chiefs. In fact, the Chiefs have had one of the best offenses, if not the best offense in the NFL for the last several years. They've had the best offense 2 out of the last 3 years, and the one season they didn't was because Mahomes missed a couple games. And even with his absence, they still finished as a top 5 team in offense in the NFL. So the thing that USC has been lacking the most is recruiting at the quarterback level. especially recently. And that's where I think Eric Bieniemy could prove to work wonders with a program like USC, is because not only does he have a track record of, by the way, developing Adrian Peterson and Jamal Charles in their prime. Those two guys combined for 7 Pro Bowls and 8 seasons under Eric Bieniemy as a running backs coach, because that's how he got his career started from a coaching perspective. But then from a quarterback perspective, you're looking at USC and you're saying to yourself, you got Bryce Young and DJ Uiagalelei in your backyard. Young at Mater Dei, which is in Santa Ana, California, an hour away from USC. Uiagalelei, St. John Bosco's in Bellflower, that's about 45 minutes from USC. These guys are in your backyard. Now, in fairness, Young was committed, but then he left to flee greener pastures at Alabama. Those guys, you can't just let those guys go. There's a guy in Jake Garcia who was a former 4-star quarterback out of Narbonne in California. Then he fled to go to Georgia. These are elite prospects that USC has had within their grasp. And so with a guy like Eric Bieniemy, with the cachet that he has, with the respect that players have for him, I would almost argue that it's more important for the players to respect the coach more at the college level than at the NFL level, because at the college level, these guys are still maturing. They're seeking role models. They're seeking guys that they can look up to. And the amount of cachet, the amount of clout that a guy in Eric Bieniemy would have at the collegiate level, I think would prove absolute wonders for a program like USC that desperately needs a new face, that desperately needs someone with credibility, with backing, that the boosters would support. We obviously know that a main factor behind every major athletic decision at USC is because of the boosters that support that school, that fund their program. So there's even a recruit in 2023. I don't know how much into the weeds everyone is as far as recruiting, but in 2023, there's a kid, Malachi Nelson, who's from Southern California, a 5-star quarterback, the number 1 quarterback prospect in the class of 2023. He's committed to Oklahoma. So a guy like that doesn't come away, doesn't leave your state, perhaps if you've got a guy in Eric Bieniemy there. That's what I'm thinking. So the only concern that you'd have is whether he would jump ship to attain an NFL head coaching job if he was to experience some success at the collegiate level. And that's certainly something that Mike Bohn has weighed and considered. But I think it's something that you absolutely need to consider and need to be taking a serious look at if you're USC. Again, if the interest is mutual, I think that's a match made in heaven. I definitely think that's someone that could totally transform the relevancy of the program. They experienced some success with Lane Kiffin and with Steve Sarkisian and with Ed Ogeron and with Larry Scott and now with Clay Helton. But think about when they were really relevant. Guys with some NFL experience. Brian Stevenson, he would be perfect. I appreciate the validation with that. So I don't really see, not to mention, again, he's got the background as a running backs coach as well. What was USC's bread and butter for years? Reggie Bush, Mr. Heisman. Bring back some of these elite running backs. That's how you do it. So that's what I would say.